Hey everybody, welcome back to LegalSpeak, a Cold North production. I'm the Law Morris, and this is the video essay series in which I get to talk about the games I've been playing and what I think of the video game industry as a whole. Don't forget to check out coldnorthpro.com for everything we do all in one spot. Today we're going to be talking about the 2018 David Cage game, Detroit Become Human. But before we get started, consider this your official spoiler warning for a game that is very easily spoiled. If you haven't played Detroit and you don't want it spoiled, stop watching now. Oh, and there also might be some spoilers for Until Dawn too, so keep that in mind. Going into Detroit, I knew it was a choose-your-own-adventure game, but that was basically it. I had never played a David Cage game before, so I was able to come into it with fresh eyes and no preconceived notions of what a David Cage game is supposed to deliver. After playing it through, I feel like Detroit is 2/3 a good game and 1/3 a really bad young adult novel adapted into an even worse movie. Drop Jennifer Lawrence into the role of either Marcus or North, put some fire behind her and make a poster out of it, and you could easily have convinced me this game was marketed at 13-year-old girls who were looking for their next Hunger Games fix. Throughout the game, you play as 3 main characters and move through their stories as they all happen concurrently with one another. Kara's story, the best of the 3, provided emotional intensity and some seriously heart-pounding moments that kept me on the edge of my seat throughout. Connor's story provided an excellent opportunity to step into the shoes of a detective and thoroughly, or not so thoroughly, investigate each scene to uncover the truth and the connection between each individual incident. And Marcus's story provided all the subtlety and nuance of a brick to the face. Overall, across the 3 stories, the game has pushed the choose-your-own-adventure genre forward, and if you feel the same way I do about this specific type of narrative, that is an excellent thing. Driving the entire experience of a choose-your-own-adventure game is the decision-making and how it affects the outcome of the story. For the most part, decisions in Detroit are well thought out and provided an adequate difference in outcomes as each of the stories progressed. That being said, the decisions of Detroit are essentially the entirety of the game, as outside of those decisions and a handful of QuickTime events, the game is essentially one gigantic cutscene, and considering this fact, decision-making does come up short in a handful of ways. Each time the player is presented with an option, they're practically beaten over the head with the fact that they're either making an important decision, saying something of significance, or looking at something that could come into play later on. Every time I saw a small padlock icon unlock while looking at something, or after saying something to another character, I felt almost cheated, like the game was spoon-feeding me the possibilities rather than me learning about things organically. This all came to a head when the police officer stopped by Rose's house, and I had a minute before opening the door to track down 3 pieces of deviant evidence that were laying out and about. I was quickly able to find 2 of the 3, but ran out the rest of my time before opening the door desperately searching for the 3rd, only to learn later on that I wasn't able to hide it because I hadn't looked at it previously. Whether I had looked at all 3 items or not, the game should have let me frantically search to find those 3 items and hide them away in that moment. Showing the padlock icon unlock took away from the experience and the tension of that moment. Had I looked at those items and no icon had appeared, it would have forced me to be significantly more engaged and aware of my surroundings, raising the stakes of the entire scene. The nature of the choose-your-own-adventure genre allows for several major "oh" moments for the player. That moment when the audience connects something happening right now to something that had happened previously, and everything sort of clicks and falls into place in their minds. The best and most effective "oh" moments are the ones that are a slow burn, and the payoff comes hours after the decision had been made. While this became a significantly smaller problem in the late game, early on, it felt as though the developers were treating the player as if they had the memory of a fruit fly. Found the gun in Todd's nightstand? Better give the player the opportunity to grab it less than 15 minutes later. Encountered Leo in Carl's studio? Better bring him back in a few minutes for a confrontation and make sure the audience hasn't forgotten who he is. See and free the zombie androids in Zlatko's basement? They're gonna be back in a few minutes to kill Zlatko. Now, I'm not going to say the game didn't have any slow burn consequences. For example, visiting Carl's grave in the second to last chapter, because he died early on, is a nice touch, but the game exhibits far too much hand-holding, and as a result, the player rarely gets the long-term payoff from a decision they had made literally hours prior. For those of you that haven't played the game and don't know, after each chapter you're shown a flowchart mapping the path of your decisions and outcomes. The other possibilities are on the flowchart, but nothing aside from the options you had and the choices you encountered are actually displayed. The rest is left blank. This was a fun little feature to see how many choices there were, and to make things even more fun, you can press the triangle button to see what percentage of your friends or players worldwide made the same decisions as you. Now, while this was really neat on my first playthrough, it somewhat takes the fun out of any subsequent playthroughs. the game almost sets off an alarm to notify the player anytime they have to make a decision. And being able to see how many other possibilities there are makes any future playthroughs much more methodical and, in my opinion, less fun. When discussing the decision-making mechanics of the game, the obvious game that Detroit can most easily be compared to is Until Dawn. Not only does Until Dawn not scream in your face every time you make a decision, but it also has significantly more long-term payoffs. On my first playthrough, Ashley immediately opened the door for Chris, and I didn't think anything of it because who wouldn't open the door in that situation? But when I watched my friends play through it and Chris tried to kill Ashley instead of sacrificing himself, suddenly Ashley locking the door and leaving Chris to die blew my mind. Until Dawn handled decision presentation better by not broadcasting it every time the player made a decision, to the point that oftentimes players don't even realize when they had made a decision. And presenting them with the illusion of choice when there was none in one infamous scene was nothing short of a stroke of genius. Detroit takes itself far more seriously than Until Dawn, and executes on the presentation in a subpar way. Where Detroit lives and breathes, though, is with characters and their interactions with one another. Trying to find a balance between the relationships the player wants to preserve and the objectives within the story they want to achieve is where the game is at its best. In case you haven't already figured it out, I hated the Marcus storyline, and found myself very early on in the game trying to get him killed so I wouldn't have to keep coming back to this miserable character that I couldn't stand. But when it became apparent that Marcus could romance North, suddenly there was something in that storyline that I was invested in. I then spent the rest of this particular storyline trying to balance my decision making and Marcus's relationship with North. Trying to be a pacifist, non-violent protester while also trying to satiate what seems to be a never-ending bloodlust from a sexy android can be a difficult task to manage. But that's what made it engaging. During Connor's story, I became too invested in his friendship with Hank, and wound up not finding anything but a new BFF during my investigation, which in turn led to Connor being decommissioned a few chapters before the finale. And throughout Kara's story, the relationship was basically the entire story, so that went pretty well for me. Keeping the main characters segregated from one another until the late game made the entire experience feel like 3 small games happening in the same universe as opposed to one larger overarching narrative. The game and story would have been better served had it forced the main characters together earlier on and allowed for more interaction between them. Once again, something intricate and complex that Until Dawn did better. On the whole, the game was good. I wouldn't say it was great, but it was enjoyable. While it had its shortcomings, it did have the distinct advantage of being a choose-your-own-adventure game, which is always fun. Considering Detroit is nowhere even close to the best the genre has to offer, but is still so much better than Bandersnatch, which is currently the best choose-your-own-adventure the film medium has to offer, I feel confident in saying that the future of this genre is in video games. Detroit is one step along the way, and it's a very enjoyable one. I hope to see more choose-your-own-adventure games in the future. What are your thoughts on Detroit and the choose-your-own-adventure genre? Is Until Dawn as good as I remember it being? Did anyone else think Bandersnatch was super dumb? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much to everyone for watching. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe for a new video every week. And if you want to get in on some more free-form video game or movie conversation, you can find our podcasts, HardReset and No Refunds, right here on YouTube or on most major podcast services. I'll be back next week talking about Alien Isolation. Until then, just go play some games.